Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone to our first Southern Fire Exchange live from the field. We're live on Zoom and live on Facebook. And this afternoon, I am excited you're here. This is a new program that we've started, and I think it's going to be really interesting. My name is David Godwin, and I am the director of the Southern Fire Exchange program with the University of Florida. And in our new Live from the Field program, we're connecting fire professionals and fire scientists from across the South as they tackle fire management challenges and develop new knowledge and move fire forward. Live from the Field as a program will be shorter and less formal from our fire science webinar program that you may be familiar with. And we hope to be able to connect you with interesting stories and interesting people from across the South. Today, we're actually going out west to California. And we're going to talk with our longtime SFE friend and supporter, Ludie Bond, who's with the Florida Forest Service. And she's currently on an interesting assignment in the Sequoia National Forest. And Ludie's going to be joined by Gretchen Fitzgerald, who is the ecosystems staff officer there on the Sequoia National Forest. So following their presentation and their discussion, there will be time for you to submit questions. They have a really interesting project that they're working on. I'm sure you'll have some questions, so I hope you'll take advantage of that. If you're on Zoom, you'll be able to put those questions in the Q&A tool in Zoom, and we'll get through those. Really quickly, I'd like to take a moment to share a little bit of information about our program, the Southern Fire Exchange, if you've never joined us before. SFE is a regional program for fire science delivery in the Southeast. We're a collaborative among the University of Florida, Tall Timbers Research Station, North Carolina State University, and the U.S. Forest Service Southern Research Station. So we are sponsored by the Joint Fire Science Program, and we are the southeastern branch of the nationwide Fire Science Exchange Network. We put together programs like this one that seek to bridge the divide between the fire science and natural resource management communities. Finally, if you are joining us today from an area outside of the Southeast, welcome. And I hope that you will take an opportunity to go to firescience.gov, find the map there on their website, and connect with your local Fire Science Exchange network. These are the folks that are working to connect regional managers and researchers to address fire science issues and make differences on the ground. So you can go to firescience.gov and connect with your local Fire Science Exchange. So moving right along, it's now my pleasure to introduce our two speakers today. First off, Ludie Bond is a wildfire mitigation specialist and public information officer with the Florida Forest Service. Ludie has been a PIO for the past 20 years. She provides local, state, and national media with information about wildfire incidents, wildfire causes, wildfire prevention, prescribed burning, and fuel mitigation programs. And like I said, she's from Florida, but she's currently out on assignment in California, which is kind of how this all came together. I have a really interesting story they're going to be talking about in just a minute. She's also joined, and we're excited to have Gretchen Fitzgerald. Gretchen is an ecosystem staff officer with the Sequoia National Forest. Gretchen focuses on supporting the forest districts and staff to maintain Pacific fisher habitat, conduct meadow restoration, reduce hazardous fuels, and manage giant sequoia groves. At the same time, to restore wildfire burned forests. So welcome, Ludie. Welcome, Gretchen. I'm already excited to have you guys here today. It's been fun seeing some of the pictures and learning about the project that you're going to be sharing with everybody. So 1 second as we trade out presentations and they get to share their slides.
All right, well, thank you so much, David. We really appreciate you having us on here. And good morning from California. We are 3 hours behind you all, so it is good morning. And we'll go ahead and start our presentation, and Gretchen will kick us off.
So we're coming to you from the Sequoia National Forest. It's about 1.2 million acres. We have 3 different districts. 2 of the districts have the Sequoia National Monument. The forest manages about 33 giant sequoia groves. And I was going to talk to you a little bit today about sequoia groves and sequoia management and ecology. Sequoias are some of the largest trees in the world. They're also some of the oldest. They grow only on the western slope of the Sierra Mountains. And they're very site specific. They grow in sort of little groves, we call them, but little patches across the western slope of the Sierras. And they evolved with fire. They're thousands of years old, and they have serotinous cones, so they regenerate from after fire. For the last 100 or so years, we've been excluding fire from these groves. We've had some groves that hadn't burned in over 100 years. And normally when a fire, and they were thought to be fairly invulnerable to fire, so they would have fire come through, but they have this super thick bark and they can tolerate quite a bit of fire. And it sort of the paradigm was that they wouldn't die in a fire. And then in 2020, the Castle Fire, well, the first fires that started killing giant sequoias was the Rough Fire in 2015. We lost a few. And then in 2017, the Pier Fire, we lost a few. And then in the 2020 fire from the Castle Fire is when we really saw these huge fires coming through and just killing thousands of giant sequoias. And these are monarch sequoias, thousands of years old. And so that was sort of oh, we've got to do something. And part of the reason was because of all the dead fuel that had accumulated from all the exceptional drought we'd had, plus the fire suppression. But it just, our fire behavior, we're seeing a complete different, unprecedented levels of high severity fire. The patches of high severity fire are getting much larger. Firefighters talk about seeing fire behavior they've never seen before. And we're seeing giant sequoias die from these that we didn't expect to see. And so then we started, okay, we've got to do something different. And we have, at this point, then the Windy Fire came along and burned another 10 groves. And so we had very few groves left on the fire that hadn't burned, but it was this sense of urgency that we needed to do something before we lost them all. And so that's when we started getting congressional attention. And we had a tour from a bunch of congressmen who introduced a bill called Save Our Sequoias Act. And then we had that brought attention to at the national level from the chief. And so then he declared an emergency in July 22nd. He signed a declaration of a Giant Sequoia Emergency Response, is what we're calling it. And we set up an incident to address the fuels in these groves. And we have an IC, we have crews on both districts, and the groves that we chose were the ones that were still the greenest, that still had a lot of fuel loading, and to try and basically declare a sense of emergency and get out there and start trying to do something to protect each one of these monarchs. So retreating within 25 feet around each monarch. Giant Sequoia monarch is for the purposes of this, it's over 30 inches in diameter. So any tree over 30-inch in diameter, that's a giant sequoia. And most of the groves, there's one grove that had been logged before, so that it didn't have that many large trees, but it, so for that one, it was 20 inches in diameter. And we're pulling all the duff and all the shrubs away from around the base of it, and pulling cutting the ladder fuels from around them. And then we're also working on a mechanical contract to get in between the grove and in the sort of flatter areas. A lot of these giant sequoias are on really steep slopes, so that it's only going to be handwork. But then the whole purpose of this is to be able to put fire back on this landscape. And yeah, so here's a picture of like the before treatment and then after treatment. So we're pulling the vegetation away, and then we're creating thousands of piles. So we're going to go back in and do prescribed fire in these, and then to burn the piles, and then we'll do a prescribed burn across the landscape. And the idea, so these groves, their natural fire history is about every 10 to 15 years that they had fire in them. And so our objective is to sort of get back to some kind of balance where we can have fire in these groves and not have this accumulation, and that the fires can burn naturally and not have a lot of mortality. And so the other part of this, then the part that Ludie's been helping us with, is sort of the public outreach. And so the Giant Sequoia Emergency Response, what that did was allowed us to start implementing before we finished all of our environmental assessments, environmental analysis. And so we have, just like a regular fire incident, we have reads out there that are doing the cultural resource surveys ahead of the crews. And we did an emergency consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So we're sort of addressing the resource concerns as we go. And so part of it then is and then also working with the public. And so we did a notice that to all of our stakeholders that we're going to do this work before we started. And then we've been trying to maintain some public engagement. So I'll let Ludie talk a little bit about what we've been doing.
Yeah, and so this assignment has been really interesting for me. It's something different I haven't done before. Obviously, this project is very unique as well. So I really appreciate the invitation to be out here and do this work. As Gretchen mentioned, we held a couple of public tours, invited the public to come out and actually walk and talk and go around in the groves and take a look at the work we're doing. The photo you see here is some of the people who live in, near, and around the Black Mountain Grove over in the Western Divide District. The district ranger was also there with us. And then a lot of the very specialists on the forest with regards to wildlife, watershed issues, those kind of things. So we wanted to make it available for the public to come out. We also did media tours and had them come out to do both photos, videos, interviews with the crews, and cover the work that way. Social media is always a part of community outreach and engagement. So we've been utilizing the forest Facebook page here. The website for the Sequoia National Forest is also one of the platforms that we're using. And part of the group that I've been working with out here is creating a website specifically for the Giant Sequoia Emergency Response. And that'll be on the website for the forest as well. Press releases are going out frequently every week about the accomplishments of the project or what the crews are doing, how they're working under these hazardous conditions, because as you've probably seen in the news, our temperatures have been in the triple digits, and this is pretty arduous work that they're out there doing. What is interesting about giant sequoias is that it's not just a local story. It's not just a regional story. It's not just a national story. This is an international story. It's an emotional story about the work that's being done to protect the world's largest trees. So we're getting quite a bit of attention from media from around the world, which has been very interesting as well. Let's see, then as far as some of the public engagement and activities, you know, as Gretchen was describing, the high severity fires that this area has seen and they've seen on the forest and what has resulted as a result of that on the giant sequoias, it's fire is a concern. The communities around here are very sensitive to fire. So with the idea of putting fire back on the ground and get that natural fire regime and rotation into the forest, that's something we've also been trying to create some realistic expectations with the audiences around here and field their questions and concerns. And that'll be ongoing throughout the project. And now we'll turn it back over to Gretchen to talk about what's next with the project.
So we have until the end of 2023 to complete our emergency response. We've started in 4 of the groves, and we're trying to work with the resources we have available to get the fuels removed from around those giants. And then this winter, we hope to start burning piles. And one of the actions under the Giant Sequoia Emergency Response was a 4,500 acre prescribed burn in a really remote area where we have 3 giant sequoia groves. So we hope to burn that this winter. And then the emergency part of it will be wrapped up by the end of next year. And then we're hoping at that point, we'll be able to put together some comprehensive plan of all of our groves, not just these emergency groves, but all of the groves, and then start developing a schedule for regular prescribed burns in these groves. Every year, we'll be burning a few of them to try and reestablish a cycle of being able to have prescribed fire in all of these groves on a regular basis.
And you're using drones primarily for a lot of that work, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're doing we're setting up, we've got drones coming next week to survey that 4,500 acre prescribed burn and then help set up a firing plan for that.
And of course, the idea is, as what the picture was showing you here, these pictures we've just gone through, was some of that natural regeneration, because the cones on the giant sequoias are serotinous. So it's been nice to go out in the field and actually see some of the new babies popping up.
And then some of the monitoring that we're doing as part of this is we have crews out there looking at what the impacts of the fires were, and we're identifying some areas that burned so hot. The biggest, highest severity burn in a sequoia grove was Freeman Creek Grove. That grove was over 1,000 acres, and 60% of it burned high severity. And it's also our farthest south grove. And so that's the one of sort of the most concern, that it won't regenerate naturally. So we do have a reforestation plan for that, that we'll be planting it next spring. But we did go out there and we found a few seedlings regenerating, so that was pretty exciting. But there's a lot of area that's not regenerating, and so we'll be planting that. So some of these groves we feel like are going to need a little help. We're also going to do some hand piling and fuel removal in them. We don't want to do too much with heavy equipment because of these high severity burned parts, because these seedlings are trying to get established. In a few years, we might be able to go back in and do some mechanical work, but for now we're just doing hand piling and monitoring, seeing what seedlings are coming in, seeing how much, because nobody's ever seen this kind of fire, so no one knows, do they come back? You know, the seed trees are all dead, so we kind of feel like we have like one chance for these groves to regenerate on their own. And then the monitoring during the Giant Sequoia Emergency Response is also, we're setting up photo points before and then after the hand treatments, and then we're going to be monitoring after we get some fire back out there on the ground as well.
So with that, we'll turn it over for any questions you may have, David, or any that came up in the chat while we were presenting.
All right, well, Ludie and Gretchen, thank you so much for talking about your project with us today. And it's really amazing photographs. It sounds like you have some interesting work. I want to remind everybody, if you're on Zoom, you can put your questions into the Q&A tool in Zoom, and we'll get to those questions and see if Ludie and Gretchen can address them. You can also, because we're on Zoom as well, you can put those questions in the chat and we can get to those also. Interesting work that you guys are doing. Could you talk about, Southern Fire Exchange, where a program really tied to the science and working across that boundary between science and management? Are there research partners or science partners that are involved or engaged in this project?
Yeah, so we've been working with UC Berkeley and UC Davis, and we have an ecology group in the region that we work with. So we have a zone ecologist on the Sequoia that also works on the Inyo and the Sierra. And then we have another, so there's two of them, and they're the ones who sort of help put together these agreements with the universities, and then they also set up the monitoring plans. And then as part of that, though, then there's a collaboration with the crews from UC Davis and then some of the professors from UC Berkeley. And so then we're making sure that across the board, so Mountain Home State Park, the groves on the Sequoia National Park, and the groves on Sequoia National Forest, that we're doing all the same sort of data gathering, so that the researchers can then take that information across boundaries and use that to develop their papers. And there's already been several papers that have come out that have been published about sort of the Sequoia complex, or the Castle Fire, and what the impacts from the fires are from those groves. And what they found is, like, the giant sequoias that are most vulnerable to dying in these fires are the ones that have the burn scars, where all the bark has been burned off, and then they have heartwood exposed. And so as part of what we're doing then is taking that information, and that's how, like, we've designed our prescriptions, is based on that information. So in front of those burn scars, then we're pulling all of the duff all the way down to bare mineral soil. And firefighters have also anecdotally said that that's what they've seen, is that the fire is burning in that duff, and we've got some really thick duff, and it's burning in there, and it's just this amount of heat that builds up in that duff, and then those send out sparks, and that wood that's unprotected from the bark is what catches on fire and gets those trees burning, or from the top, the cinders coming from the top and landing in the branches. But so part of our prescription then is, to try and really protect those fire scars, that those are the most vulnerable part of the tree.
Thank you. It's exciting to hear that there are some projects that have already started to put together research to study some of these previous wildfire events to help guide the work that you're doing now. We are recording this discussion today, and we'll try and put links to some of those relevant publications up when we put the recording on our YouTube channel too. So if anybody's interested in diving in a bit more, we'll have those there. We had a question that came in from Rita in the Q&A on Zoom, and Rita asked, how do you expect climate change to impact the future of your work and the future of these groves? Good question.
So climate change is affecting it already. I mean, so in California, there was some exceptional drought in 2015 to 2017, and that's what caused like a huge mortality in our forests. And some of it was this big beetle outbreak, but in some instances, you don't even see signs of beetles in these trees. But a third to a half of the canopy of the forest died, and that just created this incredible fuel loading that then is now exasperating these high severity fires. We're also seeing longer fire seasons, higher winds, higher temperatures. Right now, we've just had record-breaking heat waves, and they're really finding that when it's this hot, these fires just take off and they're super hard to stop. So the effects of climate change affects the fire behavior and the fire severity. And then the other part that's happening with climate change is the ability of these to regenerate. And so some of the predictions with climate change is that the shrubs will do much better. They're much better at absorbing, staying alive in the hot summer when there's very little fuel moisture. It's also affecting how much moisture we have in the winter. This is a snow-dominated environment, so how much snowfall we get in the winter and how long it persists really it affects the whole ability of this forest to recover as a forest. And we are seeing changes. 2002 McNally fire was the largest fire on the forest, and a lot of that was forest, and there's no longer forest, and we're not seeing it return as forest. It's staying as a shrubland. So we are seeing changes in our forest, going from forest to shrubland. And then we've seen these huge patches of high severity that we're expecting that those need help through. And that's why I'm really trying to focus on the reforestation part of that, at least in the higher elevations. We've got some models in California that researchers have developed to look at how the forest will reforest, and how likely the success of reforestation would be. And so we've been using those as well to determine where we should be doing reforestation, where we should be putting our effort. Because right now on the Sequoia National Forest, we have over 60,000 acres of reforestation need identified, and there is no way that we are going to be able to address all of that. And so we're focusing our efforts based on accessibility, but also on where we're most likely to be successful in our reforestation efforts.
And other changes that we've seen recently, an article came out in Wildfire Today that was showing the last 2 decades of fire history in the state of California. So this past, 2 decades ago, the majority of the fires were happening in Southern California. I think the acreage was maybe 2 million over that decade. I'm not quite sure, but what it showed was in this past decade, more fires were occurring in Northern California, and the acreage was practically tripling. So you can't ignore the facts of the number of fires that are occurring, the amount of acreage that's being burned. And so when you have situations like this, you've got to be proactive, because as you've seen on the news right now, California's got fires from top to bottom. So fires are coming. So it's what can you do ahead of time to prepare and make sure that things are protected.
We had a question that came in the chat from Judith, and Judith is asking if you're getting a lot of media and media attention on this project and on the site.
Oh, yes, we are. Every time we put out a press release, or when it first was announced that the project was coming forward, and as Gretchen mentioned, the Chief Moore signed it on July 22nd, and on August 1st, there were boots on the ground doing work. So we're a good solid 6 weeks into doing work on the forest with this project. And so the media attention has just been consistent. Every week, we're getting more and more requests for stories on not only the accomplishments, but the crews doing the work. Yeah, so, and as I mentioned before, it's not just the local media that's expressed interest, but also national and international media, because these trees are treasured by people all over the world. And so we want to make sure we get this story out. And again, we appreciate you inviting us to be on this platform, because it's another platform to get the information out.
Absolutely. It's great to have you all on here. It is. I mean, these are trees that, we're not talking about the Southeastern United States. We're outside of our normal range, but whether you're in Alaska or Key West or anywhere or across the globe, these are trees that are global treasures that I think many of us who either work in natural resources or have our heart in natural resources, or both, see the value and importance of these amazing living things. So I have a question. This whole project that you're involved in, it's like a fire, right? Like you're talking about this as an emergency response. You're talking about, organizing and having public information officers and the resources that come with a wildfire incident. Is this something new? Has this been done before in terms of an ecosystem project outside of an actual, threat from a wildfire or some other kind of incident like that? Is this new?
Yes, it's super exciting. It's sort of like, how can we respond quickly to an emergency? So this is the first time that I know of that somebody set up an incident to do project work is essentially what it is, and to be able to respond quickly. And so from the time that the chief made this declaration, and we didn't know it was coming, I mean, in a week, from the time that the concept was introduced to the time it happened, the chief signed it in a week, and then we spent a week preparing, and then we set up an incident. And the beauty of this, doing it this way, is we don't have to have everything all figured out ahead of time. It's just like reacting to a fire. You're reacting to the emergency. And so we can get boots on the ground, we can get started, and then we can get reeds out there to start getting the cultural information and flagging the stream management zones and looking for the goshawks to see if, the nests are occupied. And then at the same time, we can be actually doing work. And, so we've treated over 1,000 giant sequoias, around a giant sequoias now, and created thousands of piles. But it's super flexible, so as we go along, we can grow or shrink based on the work and the resources available. I will put a plug out there that we're looking for EMTs and division soups right now. So if anyone is interested in working with us, we'd love to have you.
Very interesting. I hope that there are some folks who are doing research just to try and understand how well this approach works for solving a natural resource management issue that is very time limited, right? It requires quick action and a lot of collective action together. So it's an interesting and exciting project. Thank you so much for sharing it with us today. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A and chat. So thanks everybody who asked questions. Gretchen and Ludie, do you have any other parting words or things that you want to share with everybody before we wrap things up?
No, from my standpoint, I appreciate the invitation to be a part of this, and glad we were the first live from the field with Southern Fire Exchange. So yeah, Gretchen.
Yeah, and we're love having visitors and people interested in what we're doing out here. So if you have any further questions, our public affairs officer, Alicia Embry, will field any questions and be happy to put you in contact with whoever it is you need to talk to if you're interested. And we're always open to help with research, monitoring. We're going to be doing a lot of burning this winter, so let us know if you want to come and be a part of this.